Imagine this. The notes of Ode to Joy echo over North America, and the blue flag of the European Union flutters above Parliament Hill in Ottawa. Strange? Maybe? Impossible? Not entirely. At least not in today's world of shifting alliances. In recent years, an idea that once sounded like political fan fiction has started appearing in serious debates. What if Canada joined the European Union? This isn't just internet chatter. Think tanks, opinion writers, and even some politicians have started to explore the idea as a real possibility. And with Canada's new Prime Minister visiting the Governor-General to prepare for a snap election, the timing could not be more interesting. So why would Canada even think about leaving the orbit of its closest partner, the United States, and looking 5,000 kilometers across the Atlantic toward Brussels? And what would that mean for Canada, for Europe, and for the world? Today, we're going to unpack this idea step by step. Looking at Canada's European identity, its troubled relationship with Washington, the economic and defense opportunities in Europe, and the legal roadblocks that stand in the way. At first glance, the idea of Canada joining the EU might sound bizarre, but when you look closer, Canada is arguably the most European country outside of Europe. Think about it. Canada's official languages are English and French, its political system is a Westminster-style parliamentary democracy, and its head of state is still King Charles III. These are not just symbolic ties. They shape how Canada governs, legislates, and even celebrates its national identity. Canada also shares many of Europe's core values: universal healthcare, strong labor protections, and a commitment to multiculturalism and social welfare. In fact, if you dropped a European citizen into downtown Montreal or Ottawa, they might feel surprisingly at home. Not just because of the French signs, but because of the familiar social and political atmosphere. Economically, Canada already has deep links with Europe. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, between Canada and the European Union, has eliminated most tariffs and created one of the largest free trade zones in the world. This deal has already boosted trade by billions of dollars annually, making Europe Canada's second largest trading partner after the United States. All of this makes Canada a unique candidate for closer integration with Europe. But, cultural similarities alone aren't enough to make a country consider such a big shift. To understand why this debate is heating up, we need to look at Canada's relationship with its giant neighbor to the south, a relationship that, in recent years, has been far from smooth. For most of its history, Canada's foreign policy could be summed up in just two words: follow Washington. The United States buys nearly 3/4 of Canada's exports, shares the world's longest undefended border with it, and is its top security partner through NATO and NORAD. But this deep partnership has been tested, and some would even say shaken, in recent years. The real breaking point came during Donald Trump's presidency. Trade wars hit Canada hard. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and even threats against the auto industry disrupted billions of dollars in commerce. Trump openly talked about Canada becoming the 51st state, a statement that, for many Canadians, crossed a line between friendly neighbor and, bullying big brother. These tensions, really forced Ottawa to rethink its over-reliance on the United States. The new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has signaled that Canada is ready to chart a more independent course. His first trip abroad after taking office was not to Washington, but actually to Paris and London, a highly symbolic choice that sent a clear message about where Canada might be headed. These moves are not just symbolic diplomacy. They're really part of a larger strategy: to look for partners beyond the United States and reduce economic and political dependence on one country. And this is where Europe starts to look very attractive, not only because of shared values, but also because of what both sides stand to gain. If Canada sees benefits in turning toward Europe, the feeling may be mutual, because Europe has its own reasons for wanting Canada closer. Since Brexit, the European Union has lost one of its largest economies and its main English-speaking member. Canada could help fill that gap, giving the EU a new partner that shares a similar political culture, speaks both English and French, and has a major economy in the Group of Seven. Energy is one of the biggest factors. Europe has been scrambling to reduce its dependence on Russian oil and gas, especially since the war in Ukraine. Canada is a top energy producer with vast reserves of oil, natural gas, and critical minerals like nickel and cobalt, all crucial for Europe's energy security and green transition. Defense is another area where Canada could strengthen Europe. The European Union is creating a €150 billion defense fund to encourage members to buy more European-made weapons and reduce dependence on the United States. Canada's advanced aerospace industry and experience in NATO missions make it a valuable partner. In short, Canada could offer Europe something it desperately needs: a reliable supplier of energy, a capable defense partner, and a major democratic ally across the Atlantic. But before anyone can start planning a European welcome party, there's a big obstacle we need to talk about: the legal and political barriers that stand in the way of Canada's EU membership. Here's where the dream of Canada joining the EU runs into its hardest wall: the law. Under Article 49 of the Treaty on European Union, only European states can apply for membership. That's where things get tricky. Canada, of course, is geographically in North America. There have been exceptions and special cases. Cyprus is, politically European but geographically located in Asia, and it became a member of the European Union back in 2004. Turkey has actually been a candidate for decades because of its cultural and historical ties to Europe, even though most of its territory lies in Asia. But Morocco applied in 1987 and was rejected outright, simply because it wasn't considered European enough. Canada would face the same problem. It's not a member of the Council of Europe, which honestly many legal scholars say is a baseline requirement to be considered a European state under European Union law. Unless the European Union rewrote its rules, Canada's application would not even get past the starting line. This means that for Canada to join, the EU would have to change its treaties, and that's a process requiring unanimous agreement from all member states. That's a tall order, especially when many European countries are already divided on expansion to places like Ukraine and the Western Balkans. So, while the idea is exciting, legally speaking it is very difficult, though not completely impossible. And yet, despite these barriers, interest in the idea keeps growing inside Canada. To understand why, we need to look at what Canadians themselves think. What do Canadians themselves think about joining the EU? The answer is surprisingly mixed, and that's what makes this debate so fascinating. Recent polls show that around 40 to 50% of Canadians say they would support exploring EU membership if it were legally possible. Support is highest among younger Canadians and those living in major cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. These groups see closer ties with Europe as a way to share values on climate policy, human rights, and social welfare. For them, Europe feels like a natural partner in building a fairer and more sustainable future. But there's also strong opposition. About a third of Canadians are against the idea, and 1 in 4 are undecided. Opponents worry about losing sovereignty to Brussels, pointing to frustrations Europeans themselves often express about EU bureaucracy. Others say the sheer distance between Canada and Europe makes the idea, impractical. And, some warn that Europe has its own economic and political problems, from migration crises to slow growth, that Canada might end up importing. The fact that this question is even being polled is, honestly, historic. 10 years ago, the idea of Canada joining the EU would have been dismissed as a fantasy. Now, it's a real topic of discussion, showing just how much Canada's global outlook is changing. This growing public debate is one reason Ottawa is looking at new strategies to diversify its alliances. And that brings us to the big question. Beyond public opinion, what would Canada actually gain strategically from a closer alliance with Europe? And what steps is it already taking to move in that direction? For Canada, the discussion about Europe isn't just about culture or trade. It's about survival in a world where alliances are shifting fast. Canada's economy is still heavily tied to the United States, but recent trade wars have made it clear that relying too much on one partner is risky. Ottawa is actively trying to diversify. For example, it has signed new agreements to supply Europe with liquefied natural gas and critical minerals for electric vehicle batteries. This gives Europe energy security while giving Canada a massive new market. Defense is another area where Canada is recalibrating. The country is considering purchasing Saab Gripen fighter jets from Sweden with the option to assemble them in Canada, a move that would create jobs and reduce reliance on US-made equipment like the F-35. Canada has also announced purchases of radar systems from Australia and is exploring joint projects with European defense firms. All of this signals a shift toward a more balanced foreign policy. Canada doesn't want to abandon the US. NATO remains a cornerstone of its defense, but it wants to be able to make independent decisions in a multipolar world. As Prime Minister Mark Carney put it, the US is not our only option. This strategy isn't just about economics or defense, it's about giving Canada leverage. By building strong partnerships across the Atlantic, Canada can avoid being caught in the middle when Washington and Brussels clash, and it can help shape global rules instead of just following them. The big question now is whether this growing closeness will ever go as far as full European Union membership, and what that would mean for Canada, Europe, and the global balance of power. So, could Canada actually become the European Union's 28th member? Legally, it's a long shot. The treaties would need to be rewritten, and every EU country would have to agree. Politically, it would be one of the most ambitious moves in Canada's history, but strategically the idea isn't as far-fetched as it once seemed. Think about what this would mean. A transatlantic union stretching from Vancouver to Vienna, combining Canada's natural resources and energy wealth with Europe's massive market and growing defense ambitions. It would create a new geopolitical powerhouse, one that could rival the United States and China in influence. For Canada, it would mean stepping out of America's shadow and diversifying its future. For Europe, it would mean gaining a stable, democratic partner with energy security and military expertise at a time when the continent is rearming and searching for reliable allies. Even if full European Union membership never happens, the very fact that we are talking about it shows how much the global order is shifting. Canada is no longer content to rely on just one partner. The world is multipolar now, and Ottawa wants a seat at every table that matters. But what do you think? Should Canada break away from its heavy dependence on the United States and throw in its lot with Europe? Or would geography, politics, and sovereignty concerns make this a step too far? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take on this. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next breakdown of the biggest geopolitical questions shaping our world.